Well, this morning before the bell, Delta Airlines reported third quarter earnings. Let's talk more about the numbers and talk about what it might mean for other airlines. For that, we get to Jarrett Bilous. He is S&P Global Ratings Airlines Managing Director. Thank you for sticking with us here, Jarrett. So, the company talked a lot about the Crowdstrike issues and how that affected it. How much of that do you think is really what was at the bottom of this? And how do you think Delta is doing once you peel that back?
Well, thanks for having me. I think we would consider it a one-time item. I mean, clearly it's going to affect the results in the quarter, and did affect the results. But I think we can look through that. Not overly surprised with the results that came through. We heard a lot of discussion on domestic overcapacity in Q2. So I think in some respects there's some positive takeaways here, that it appears that supply-demand dynamics are perhaps a little more balanced heading into the end of the year, and what that means for the other airlines, they should all benefit to some extent. I think when you get a tightening of supply, presumably that lends to some price support.
Jarrett, any sense of how Hurricane Milton is going to affect this industry? Which are more exposed to Florida than others?
Yeah, I think it's really early to say. Delta does have some obviously some capacity in some of the key markets in Florida that were affected. So, we're really waiting to hear more on that front. I think some of the other airlines will have, also some of the smaller airlines will have some impacts. So we're really waiting to see. I think American, probably not as affected with the hub in Miami, but I think it's still really early days on that. But presumably there shouldn't be a lasting effect on the results, at least heading into next year.
And talk to us about capacity, Jarrett, because obviously this is always very important for the airlines here, especially as we look at, and I know we've got different classes of airlines when we talk about the Deltas of the world and the, for example, Spirits of the world. But given that there have been some reports about Spirit, maybe, some concerns that it won't be able to continue as a going concern, does that then create some capacity openings for some of the other airlines?
Yeah, I think it's really speculative to say at this point. Firstly, they haven't announced any filing. There's speculation in the market at this point. Clearly, they're struggling as an airline to become profitable, and that's pretty obvious. I think the impact that it could have is really debatable at this point. I don't think anyone is really willing to come out and say what it might mean. It's not necessarily, even in a hypothetical scenario, it doesn't necessarily mean that the company will stop flying. Presumably, that's not going to have a major impact on capacity, but and it is a smaller carrier when you look at the scale of capacity from particularly the big three, as well as Southwest. So it's something that we're watching, but I think it's really early to say what impact that could have on capacity and overall industry fundamentals. It's something that we're watching, obviously, though.
Jarrett, broadly across the space, how does business travel look like right now?
Business travel, at least the disclosure from Delta, looks like it's some other data points that we've looked at, looks like it's continuing to trend positively. So that's an encouraging sign as well. Business travel is something that's been a lot slower to recover relative to leisure travel, certainly. With that, it promotes higher margins simply through bigger uptake in some of the premium offerings that a lot of the airlines have. So I would say, it doesn't appear to be back to where we were, pre-COVID, clearly. But I think it's slowly trending, positively. And I think that's somewhat of an encouraging sign for the business, for the airline industry overall.
What about the fuel cost picture? Is that also, how much of a tailwind is that for the industry, and how sustainable is it?
Yeah, it's very difficult to say. I think it's a near-term bright spot that we've seen some reduction in fuel prices, because fuel is clearly a pretty important input, cost input, and very small fluctuations can have an outsized effect on airlines' earnings and cash flow. We use our forecast for WTI as well as a refinery spread in our estimates, and I think right now, the picture is somewhat positive compared to where we were certainly in the last couple of years. But it's unpredictable effectively unless you have a well-established hedging program, which most of the airlines don't have. So the other point to note is that generally ticket prices will track fuel costs. There will be a lag, but usually there's somewhat of a positive correlation there. So in the event that you have sustainably lower fuel prices, it's possible that that could also lead to some pressure on unit revenue. So that's something that we're watching. But I think in the near term, it's certainly a source of it's a positive.
Jarrett, thank you for joining the show today. Appreciate your time and insight.
Great. Thank you for having me.